Gommer. Hi, Fennemiek. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon.
It's our pleasure. So, friends, I'm happy welcoming you to this discussion, which is to be led by Miss Fennemiek Gommer. She has already joined. You can see her on the screen, and very happy to share. There are more than 225 participants that have so far joined. Friends, the context to this discussion and the reason behind inviting Miss Fennemiek was a book which came to my notice, and the title of the book goes Boardroom Creativity, which has been recently published and authored by Ms. Gommer with Annie Mike Egenkamp, the co-author. If I take this opportunity introducing Ms. Gommer, she's a purpose-driven strategy and innovation consultant. Besides being a partner of Karkata Business Innovation, Fennemiek is chair of board of the several family-owned businesses, ambassador for the INSEAD Directors Network, and lecturer in business transformation and innovation. She complemented her industrial design study with degrees in design thinking, brand strategy, and the business in the United States, Italy, and France. She enjoys applying her international perspective and design thinking approach to a wide range of business challenges, which is why she ended up as a boardroom consultant. Her specific expertise is in wicked problems. We all know how, there's a very famous book, The Games People Play, and we all understand that boardrooms are, again, not an exception to the wicked problems or situations or tricks. So she expertise on this, as well as the future-led strategy development and innovation as a design change. Today, when there's a great transformation going in the approach, the way boards are run, and innovation, design thinking, integrated thinking approaches are taking a front seat, considering newer challenges that are in front of the board, that is sustainability, ESG, cyber risk, frauds, having a long-term strategy for risk management. These aspects become really very important. So without wasting more time, I would like to welcome Fennemiek again and you all for sparing your time and joining us in this discussion. Over to you, Fennemiek, for your discourse. Friends, as we go, as far as the design of these Power Talks are concerned, we'll have the discourse by Fennemiek first, and then we will keep 15 to 20 minutes for question and answer session. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for sharing the slides. And I thank you all for coming. And honestly, I would prefer to be in a room with you and maybe also a smaller company so we can really have an interactive discussion together, which will be a bit more difficult now. So I think for some of these things, I may share information with you that you already know and some not, but at least then we can share some practical examples. And I hope this also will lead to some discussion and question afterwards. As was said, it started with the invitation started with this book. So I took the future readiness to design the future of your business as a guiding principle for this talk, which is really what the book is about. And it starts with a quote that is the next slide, please, that I think you will all be familiar with. If I can have the next slide. I'm sorry, I cannot. Yes, thank you very much. I think this, as I understand, you're all independent board directors. So we're all in the same seat and we have to strive to do the long-term value creation for the company. And for a company to be successful in the long run, this is a very basic principle. And we need to do two things: exploit what is the running business, but also think about what is not yet, the future business. Or, some people call this run, change. We have called it in the book exploit, explore. And it's really the second part, the creating what is not yet, that the main focus of this book is about, and also the main focus on the talk. So how to do that? What is needed in sorry, I see some messages that the slides, people don't see the slides. I'm not sure if that's something that needs to be solved. I'm very happy to share the slides afterwards, if that helps. Anyway, so this whole idea about create what is not yet, how do you do that? And what does it mean for us as business directors? How do we make sure that we have the right balance between exploit what is and create what is not yet? So if I can have the next slide, I think it also aligns with research that the World Economic Forum, I think you are aware of the World Economic Forum, they do research about the future of what kind of skills do we need in the workforce to make sure that we look forward and that we really understand what is going on and how to deal with the future. And for the last years, the top 10 skills on the rise, on the first place, there has been the creative thinking, which does not mean, and you see it on the second, analytical thinking is not important, but the one they say that is really changes the most and that we really need more and more of is the creative thinking. Now, if we were in a smaller room, I would ask you, why do you think this is the case? So maybe to just reflect on a bit, why would we all need in the workforce, why would we need more creative thinking? And I think in the introduction, we talked about wicked problems, and that is one of the answers. Huh? The more complexity there is around us with geopolitics or with the difficult problems we have to solve, and everything is interrelated, the more creativity we need to solve these or to address these problems, because they're not always so easy to solve. And another very important part about why we need more creativity is because of all the technological developments. So the more AI and technology can take over, the more we need to become more human, you would say, and really use the right side brain of our side. And I see some answers indeed that creativity is needed in this fast changing world. Specifically, when we talk about designing the future of your business, it's also needed for another reason. If I can get the next slide, please. And that is because, I don't see the next slide yet. Maybe, but anyway, we are talking about business life cycles. This is another one that you are very familiar with. You go through one life cycle of your company, and then it's time at a certain point to design the next. Of course, the challenge is, when do you start designing the next? And because for that next cycle you need creativity in a different way. And another big change that has been going on in the last few years is because of this fast changing world, and specifically because technology is changing faster and faster, the average business life cycles are going down. So on the US stock market, they researched that, for example, the maturity of a company, and this was in the 70s, the average age of a company was 80 years, and now it has gone down to 15 years before the company dies, so to speak. So while people are getting older and older, companies are getting younger and younger. So they have to reinvent themselves more often. And of course, we can do that, but it requires a different way of thinking. It requires a different way of going about the future. And this is what this talk is about. How do you design that next cycle, that next, and what is needed, and how do we look at it from a board perspective? Because I think the first challenge is always, when do you start doing that? Huh? As you see here, I think we are so busy often with the existing business and because we need creativity there as well, we'll come back, that we sometimes forget to start thinking about the second cycle and how to design the second cycle. Going to the next slide, please. You may be familiar with, it's quite a famous article in the Harvard Business Review from 2012, which was called Managing Your Innovation Portfolio. And they talked about the golden ratio. They did research with different companies. What do we need to do? How much of our innovation and creativity do we need to put into the existing life cycle, the incremental changes, improving what is, which is, of course, needs attention as well. And at that point, they said 70% of your innovation efforts should go into improving your existing business. This was 2012. Then they said 20% should be invested in substantial innovation, and that is what they called adjacent business. So it's not so much new business, but new to the company. So exploring different revenue streams, exploring different new businesses, new innovations for the company should be 20%. The transformational, so really new to the company, new to the world, what we have started to call disruptive innovation as well, they said that's 10% of your innovation. It was based on research best practices. You know, the companies that do well, that are the most future ready, they have that sort of what they call the golden ratio, 10-27. And maybe, I don't know if you even use this ratio in your company. I mean, I've been on quite a few boards where we really looked at the innovation investments to make sure that we kept this 10-20-70 ratio, because that's what we thought came out of research was the best way to go forward and to split our investments in the company. Now, in 2022, MIT did the same research with the same companies, but only 10 years later. And you see, maybe, I understand some of you don't see the slides, but for those of you who do see the slides, you can see that the spread has really changed in those 10 years. So while at least I, until recently, in quite a few of my boards, was still using this 10-20-70 ratio. The reality is now already vastly, or now in 2022, a few years ago, was already vastly different. Those companies that really said, well, we're doing very well in innovation, that were the benchmark, are starting to move, and you can see it on the slide, more towards, let's say, 40-40-20 or something like that. So really moving less in the incremental innovation and more in that substantial and transformational, which fits actually with the starting point that the life cycles of companies are getting smaller and that we need to invest more in designing that next curve. Now, of course, I mean, I'm talking here very general, and I do want to make a point that, of course, it's very different in different industries. And some industries, like ICT or software, change much faster than other industries. I'm also in the manufacturing business, and I really wouldn't say that our curve there is only 10 years. So please look at how fast your environment is changing and how fast you need change. But the general trend, I think, is quite clear that we're moving towards we need to spend more time looking at how to design what is not yet, looking at this either substantial or transformation innovation. And what does that mean for us as boards, besides that we need to oversee that we have the right balance in the company? It also means something for us on a personal level, I think, and that would be the next slide. These are two people that are quite close to my heart, but they also represent something. On the gentleman that you see on the left-hand side is called Lino Tedeschi. He's the Italian chair and CEO of Tesia, one of the companies that I serve on the board with. I took him as a representative, as the executive leader, because he has, you know, the Harvard Business Law School degree. He has the INSEAD MBA. He's very strong in analytical thinking. I greatly respect him. He's built, I mean, it's a family-owned company. He's built it really, he's doubled it over the last 5 years. I mean, he's doing a great job, but he's a certain type of leader. on the right-hand side, you see Borre Akkersdijk, who is a Dutch designer who started a startup called By Borre, and my business partner Annemieke Egkamp, whom I co-wrote the book with, she's on the chair of that board. It's very much into sustainability. They want to change the world of textile production, and he's the founder and CEO, but if he's really very much the creative guy. He has the vision, and he would need the help actually of an executive entrepreneur. This is never a story about one is better than the other. It's always a story about you need both, and how can we do that, both and thinking, and what does it also mean for us as board members. And one of the things I think we need to make sure is that we have teams of people who are both executive and entrepreneurial, and we have the right balance in our company. Because if we then go to the next slide, we sometimes use for this it's called the brain dominance model by Nat Herman. And again, we'll share, we can share the slides afterwards, and all the links are in there to the names. But Nat Herman is an interesting character to me, because he has developed this model, but what is more important, he has done research within so many different companies over a time span of 30 years. So what is really obvious, that some professions share a certain kind of, let's say, brain preference. All of us, we can all do all of this. We have complete brains, so we can do the analytical, the operational, the creative, and the social thinking, but we also all have our preference. And some have it stronger than others. But for example, the average accountant or the finance person has a strong, and this is shown in his research as well, it's a cliche, but it's also true that mostly they have more of a left brain orientation. They're more analytical, into the logical thinking, data driven, and they are also more process driven, more plans, agential, etc. While by Borre, the creative designer, as the cliche will go, but it's also true, he's very much more into the explorative thinking, creative, holistic, uses images, is more visionary, etc. While other people, like I've also been on the board of a care institute, and indeed people who really work with, for example, handicapped people in my case, they tend to be more on the people orientation side. Within a company, you need all of it. And actually with this shift of going, while we say we need to focus less on the running business and more also on the future business, because this balance is shifting in most companies, we actually need more of the right-hand people. We need more people who are also creative, explorative thinking. Those are also the people who get less worried by wicked problems. They can deal with it more. So, and some people are, let's say, whole-brained like that, but most of us are not. And it's not, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's really about how do you design the right team to deal with the company that you're in, both on a, I would say, both on the board level as also on a more executive level. So moving forward to, this is the framework we use in the next slide. In the book, we say, okay, so if we know that the business cycles are getting shorter, then we need to be ready for that, because you never know exactly when is the time to design your new business. So we say, well, why don't we make sure that in our strategy days, for example, most boards have yearly strategy days, that we make sure that we start designing new possible futures now, so that we think about what could be our next business. And for example, Tesia, the example I showed with you, Lino Tedeschi, this company grew up as a dealership, the Caterpillar dealer for Italy. And they decided, well, and they bought Spain, Portugal. I mean, it's now a company that's active in 25 countries and is active in a lot of other businesses than dealers. But it started with the question, what if we're not a dealer anymore? How are we going to, what will be our possible future? No matter when we need to implement that, but we need to think about what will be our next future. And this designing of the new future, the create part, is something that we urge all boards to start doing now, even when you don't know exactly yet when you will need it. Plus also to look at designing the leadership, the board that fits that. What does it mean for the team? What kind of balance do we need then? So that's the design project. It's the light gray part on the top. And the bottom is, if we know that this world around us is changing so much and going to change much faster anyway, we also need to make sure that we have a culture of innovation, that we really are able to adapt. And what is needed for that? And that's the care and the learn part of the book. It's not only this common purpose and values, which are a basic for developing this kind of culture, but also creative intelligence. And this is the creative skills and the importance of creative thinking that the World Economic Forum was talking about as that. So these are the quadrants that we will now look into, and which I also urge you from a board level to really look at: how does this work in my board and what are we doing in this case? And it all starts, of course, with the middle is, why would we change at all? Which is what I already referred to, that some industries are really much slower in changing than other industries. So let's not make this a one size fits all, and really first look, and that's the next slide, on why would we or why should we change? And we talked a little bit about ECG already, for example, and I think there's, in general, and this is also one of my great gurus when it comes to change management, is Kotter. You probably know him as well. He used to talk a lot about burning platform. So really about the need to change because you feel the heat. And so what is the burning platform? Why do we need to change? And it can be because of the pestle analysis, because there's regulation that is changing, which in Europe is very much the case now with ECG. Or it can be because a new competitor is coming in, that disrupts your industry and you really need to do something, or because you are a little bit too late in my respect, but you are already in this maturity cycle of your company and you're going downwards, so you really need to start doing something about your current business. For example, I was at the INSEAD Family Business conference last week, and there was also a dealer. It was a Belgium dealer that was talking in the car industry, so the consumer dealers, and they were saying, which, we really were being squeezed. It's really now the end of our business curve, so now we are designing our new future. And I was sitting there in the audience and thinking, how forward-looking has my Italian company been? Because they are a business-to-business dealer. They're not in that situation yet, but they see it coming. So they're in time with designing their new future. And that's because they really do very well their pestle analysis. So one of the really questions to start with as a board member is, how well do we do our trend analysis? How well do we know what's going on around us? Are we sensitive for the so-called early warnings, early signals? And actually, McKinsey research showed that most companies is that this is where it goes wrong. This is called the sensing part, to really understand the world around you. And most of us are so busy with our own business and look at the world only as, let's say, the direct competitors and the market changes that way, that we tend to overlook early signals from, for example, disruptive competitors coming up elsewhere, or like my Italian Tesia example. Okay, there's no signal yet in the business to business dealership, but only one step removed is the consumer dealership, and there we already see it's happening. Or we see, for example, in the consumer world, that people are already moving from buying models to rental models, that consumers don't want to own anything anymore. Is that going to happen also in the B2B? Those kind of early warnings, early signals, it takes a different type of trend analysis or kind of awareness of what's going on in the world. And actually, McKinsey showed that why innovation goes wrong is often, in 80% of the cases, it's because people have not done their sensing homework good enough. So I think that would be a first question for you as a board member. What how well are we aware of what's going on around us, not only in our specific markets and industry, but in the bigger world, that we need to know to make sure that we adapt if we need to. And that's partly feel the heat, but it's of course also see the light. What kind of opportunities do you see? And this is something that Kotter, and for those of you who are familiar with his change theory, remember he always used to talk about the burning platform. And then about 10 years ago, his book started to change and he started to talk about the big opportunity. And one of the reasons he did that is he said people are so wary of having to change, and because the change has become like a constant. So if we keep saying it's really, feel the heat, and we have to change, the motivation of the change, and he started to talk about the heart of the change, is not happening anymore. So to motivate people to change, we need to talk more about this see the light, to say what's the opportunity, what is the power of the positivity. In our book, we use some of the famous examples from the past, the I Have a Dream from Martin Luther. So how can you inspire people to change is often more through positivity than through the feel the heat. But in reality, I think it's often a mix of the two, but I don't know if you recognize that. Specifically about the see the light and the big opportunity when it comes to ESG is that we have seen that I don't know if you know the trust barometer. It's a company, God, I now forgot the name, who does the annual trust barometer, both in government institutions, and it's worldwide, and companies. And over the past 10 years, we've seen that the trust in governments, even in countries where it used to be quite high, like Scandinavia and the Netherlands in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, the trust in governments in general has gone down. Now, I'm talking to Indians, it might actually be, we always have to be aware of cultural differences between both countries and companies. It might very well be that in India it has gone up, I don't know. But in the Netherlands, the trust in the government, and in Europe in general, the trust in the government has gone down. And you've seen really, of course, the horrible consequences of that and the rise of populism, etc. But you also see that what has gone up is the trust in businesses. And actually, the trust in specifically in family-owned businesses is now higher than the trust in governments. And what is more important is really an expectation of consumers that these family-owned businesses will take the lead when it comes to sustainability. So there's also an opportunity there. And I don't know about your boards, but I know some boards still only do a risk analysis and they make a risk matrix. And what we always say is make sure that you do both a risk matrix and an opportunity matrix, because these big opportunities and where do you see the power is really should be the starting point of any change. But again, this is sort of the starting point. Why design the future? How often do you need to do that? That really also depends on what kind of industry and what kind of part of the world we're living in. But I would like, for you to at least have these kind of conversations at the board level, because I also realize, or at least in my case, we are often so busy with dealing with the current business that we don't always have time to discuss these broader topics. So going to the next slide, when we have started with the why change, comes this whole idea about the difference between exploit and explore. This is another image from another company I'm on the board on. It's an international company based in the Netherlands this time. It's Ridder. They are busy in agriculture. It's the left-hand side. They are actually a supplier for these glass house builders. In general, it's, food is necessary all over the world. There's more and more sort of local for local. So this is a growth market that they're in. They're lucky guys that way. And so they're very much still on, let's say, in the first curve, they're really on the upward slide yet, because what they do is they make the engines that the glass roofs open. And they also make the screens for, so they have different products within these glass houses. And this is a growing market, it's a worldwide market. So they're really, you could say they could just sit back and think, oh, wonderful, we can just focus on exploit what is. But they also have done all their trend analysis, and they also think, well, but there is another world out there, because we have a big opportunity, because everybody needs to eat, and more, because of climate change, we need more and more glass houses. But on the other hand, we have a problem, because for the current glass houses, we need at least some people who have what they call the green fingers, who have this kind of understanding of building this industry, while they these people are starting to become more and more rare. So, and there's of course also the technological development. So, like in the car industry, we're moving towards autonomous cars. In this industry, we're also moving towards, but much further away still, but we're moving towards, can we have sort of independent glass houses? Can we grow our vegetables just with computers and climate computers? And it's, I mean, it's all starting there yet. So this whole, but some things are much more difficult. So this is on the right hand side, it's the robots for picking the tomatoes. You would think that robots, I mean, they're very advanced in quite a few industries, but somehow it seems to be very difficult to develop a robot that picks tomatoes. So there's prototypes out there, but we haven't been able to develop one yet that does a faster or better job than humans. So there's still a way to go. But what they really, so they started to invest also, and they now are sort of transforming their business towards these smart solutions and smart connected solutions to warehouses, also investing in climate computers, in this new robotics, in artificial intelligence, etc. So it's both innovation to exploit what is, because they're also improving, of course, their current products that I was talking about, the motors and the screens, etc. And they're designing what is for them completely new business, which is the right-hand side, the explore what is. You would say, okay, this is all fine, and we realize this as board members, and this comes back also to how much of your budget do you invest in the one and how much do you invest in the other. But there's another important part which we realize that not all boards realize, and that's the next slide. Because to exploit what is and to explore what is not yet, it requires a different approach. And I think most of us are trained in this exploit what is, in the sense that, you know, when we do a strategy project, we start with the status quo, we analyze what is now, and we fix and improve. And it's really, it's, let's say, it's, well, the MBA approach. And again, everything, it's not a value judgment, because it's something we really need, but it's a different type of strategy development. While for this new part, and the examples, for example, I now gave with setting up this new tomato robot, or toying with AI for how to develop this new sort of greenhouse, it doesn't start with what is already there, because there is nothing already there. What it starts with is really, where do we want to end up? And this is where we said, okay, this is sort of the future back approach to strategy development, or you can call it the lean startup method, or you can call it the design thinking, or, you know, there's all sorts of new words, but it requires a different type of approach. And it doesn't only require a different type of approach, it also requires a different kind of governance, KPIs, and what I have noticed a lot, and I don't know if you recognize that in your boards, I would be interested in that in the discussion afterwards, is that most of our CEOs are so much used to the approach of the, let's say, the MBA approach, like we do the analysis of the current, that when they then come up with new startups, etc., they sometimes use that same approach that they've been used to also to create the new, which doesn't always work, and especially not when you start to ask for, business plans, and it turns out to work differently than they thought. So to deal with transformation and to invite different people to help them, the right brain people, the more visionary people, to help them sort of come up with these new solutions, invite new type of talents in the company to do that, to set up different kind of, almost startup-like initiatives to come up with new, more radical innovations, and to also give them to room to grow, this whole sort of venture building. It requires a different strategy approach. It requires a different KPIs, different governance, and it's something, maybe it also requires different board members like us to be aware that these two approaches need to exist both in the same company, and how do we deal with that? And how do we give them enough room also to flourish? And I see a question coming by. I don't see all the questions, but it's about how far in the future do we need to think? And honestly, it's a difficult question to ask because it relates to the question, how fast do you think the world is changing? But I know a lot of companies now, and I think it's very sensible, that start longer away to really involve also the young talents in the company, to involve artists and designers, and to go far out. Because when you go far out, and of course we don't know yet what's going to happen in 50 or sometimes even 100 years, you end up with new and different inspiration, and then come back closer in the time. But the next curve, you won't need it in 50 years, but you will need it probably in 5 to 10 years. But we can talk about that later. So bringing this to the reader example, yet we had one consultant helping us, a strategy consultant, with the current business that we were in. And then we had another process, and the current business helping us improve what is, which is very important, was done with the management team, with this consultant, and we had a heyday strategy day that worked perfectly fine. Then that other part, like what is the future look like, and what kind of new possible futures can we design, is a completely different process. It's often much more open. In this case, we did involve our ecosystem, and we're working with different universities, so we did more co-creation days where we really started to design this what is possible without looking at what are the limitations or what is practical at the moment, but really what would we want it to be. So it's about organizing innovation labs and co-creation days with different types of people, bringing in these trends, coming up with solutions, and then thinking, okay, what does that mean for us if we would want to do these kind of things? And what are the most feasible options? What could we do? What are the opportunities for us? And we selected a few potential directions, and based from these few, you then really sit down and say, okay, if we want to go from A to B, what are the big shifts that we need to realize to get from A to B? It's and none of it is new. I mean, I can recommend some very good books on both. I think what is really more important is to make sure you realize what kind of strategy process are we in. Are we in the strategy process to improve what is, and the exploit type of strategy process, or are we in this other strategy process where we have to design or to create what is not yet? And what does that mean for us, for our approach, for how we design the team, how we design the tools, and what kind of work we need to do? I see some questions coming by. I would just like to check in. Do we do this in the end, or shall I try to already do some now? Can I ask the facilitator of the meeting what is the best way forward? I guess we will just continue for the moment, and I'll take your questions at the end. So this is the sort of design, the strategy part in terms of uh, what is your net, what does the next curve look like, and make sure that you start experimenting already with new ideas before. That's the first part. Another question in the strategy part is, so are we sure we have a clear enough purpose and values that give direction for the second curve? Um, And we can go to the second slide if you want. And remember, there's this drone there, and then I will give you the example from my industry. Another board I'm on is from Facilicom. Facilicom has a lot of, they have 25,000 people in all different industries, but one of their industries traditionally is a security company. And security used to be very much the man-on-man security, they call it. Huh? So we have people at the airport, and it's both, looking at security for the people coming in, but it's also for the security outside, etc. You know what I'm talking about. Now, this whole discussion is what is our common what is the common purpose of this company? And actually, what we started to discuss is it security or is it safety? Because more and more, and this is Schiphol is a good, the airport was a good example for it. It's more about a feeling of safety that we want to provide to people. So is the sense of pride of what we do together, is that more in the safety, feeling safety or security? And what does that mean also for innovation? And we are still debating this, and we're actually at the moment doing both, because if we go more into the security, and if our sense of community, and if the common purpose is this security, then you see other companies doing that well. It's going more and more into technological innovations like the drones, etc., to provide that security. But maybe a more interesting direction is that from research we know that actually security is more of a feeling. Just that the safety. So shouldn't we, and are we also exploring this whole sort of social safety, feeling safe? For example, if we provide security in train stations as well, it turns out it's much more about helping people find the right train. So how broad do we see our domain, and what does it mean for innovation and the next curve? Of course, combined also with the competencies we have in-house. And what we know from other research, and this I will provide you with a link, this is the Harvard Business EY research, is the better you have this on paper, or not paper, but really lived through, the better you know what is your purpose, why you exist, and your shared values, the better companies are at inspiration, at innovation, and at transforming their business as well, because it gives direction to everything that you do. And it's I don't know what the situation is in India, but I know that in a lot of companies here we have visions and missions on paper, but they're not always that steering. They don't always give that kind of guidance. So one of the other questions I ask in the boards that I'm part of and that they discuss is, what is actually, how would we define this purpose, and what kind of direction does it give for this next curve? Can we really use it in innovation? Can we do this purpose-driven innovation, yes or no? And Kodak has been used a lot as an example of things going wrong, because you know them all from the cameras, and of course they actually invented the digital camera as well. Uh, and people have said, well, but if their purpose was, which was more an advertising slogan at the time, but if their purpose was really about keeping your memories, then the digital camera would have been fine. But they were so much about the product and the quality of the product that they didn't see why people would want a digital camera, because the traditional camera was so much better. And they were afraid for cannibalization, which is the cultural issue that I think we all struggle with as well. But there is also the underlying, do we have enough of this clear purpose that gives direction to everything we do, which I do think is a board responsibility to make sure that your company has that. So that's the role of purpose in innovation. At care, the next part would be the lead, the design of the board. You will notice that I speak a lot about designing, because I think we don't only design objects or graphic, but I think we also should design boards, and to really think, what kind of board does this company need? A famous example from history is Puma, this German missile. Puma used to be a sports company, and he made the change from going from Puma as a sports company to Puma as a fashion company. And at that time, that was quite revolutionary. I think it was now 15 or 20 years ago. He said, when you have that kind of fashion company, you cannot only have the traditional board members in the sense of the people who know about finance, and there's always someone who knows a lot about finance, etc. We can also have people with completely different backgrounds. So he invited someone who knows a lot about consumer trends, for example, and he also invited a fashion designer in his board, which caused for a lot of writings in the governance industry. How do we look at our boards? And I'm sure you're from that time also this whole matrix developed, like what kind of expertise do we need in our board? So we make it quite functional again, like, okay, we not only finance, but maybe we need someone who knows digital transformation, or maybe we need someone who knows the fashion industry or consumer trends, etc. So that's one way at looking at boards and board composition, which completely agree is very important. And the right Puma then became a part of Gucci and the other. I mean, they're really part of a big fashion conglomerate now. And on the right-hand side is Emma Thompson. I would have asked if you know her, but no, it's not Emma Thompson. She's the actress from the Harry Potter films, Emma Watson. Thank you very much. And when I didn't realize her activities. I just knew her as an actress, and I was like, why do they invite her to be on the board? But it turns out that she's very active as actually to make fashion more green, and she started this a system to say, oh, how well are you actually doing on this? So they invited an activist to be on their board and to head their sustainability committee, which could be an interesting way forward. And let's see if we see if that's going to work, or if that's only greenwashing. But it's still very much on the, okay, she knows about sustainability, so she will lead the sustainability commitment. And what we would like to plea for is to not only look at diversity in terms of different functions, but also diversity, and I go back to the beginning with the creative brain. Do we have different thinking styles in the board? So what kind of balance do we need between exploit, explore? What kind of do we have the challenger in the board? Do we have enough of the vision? Do we have enough of the execution power? What are these different preferences of people? And do we have a well-rounded whole brain team? So let's really look at, do we have the right team for now and for the future? Going to the next slide, because it's the balance again between exploit and explore. And it's also what we call the executive versus the entrepreneurial slide. So can we build an ambidextrous board? It's called. Ambidexterity is traditionally if you're both right-handed and left-handed, but it's also used now to say ambidextrous teams are teams that are good at both exploit and explore. And can we then, are we able to combine evolution and revolution, stability and agility? Well, you can read it for yourself. It's really, if we as businesses have to both exploit what is and explore what is not yet, we need to be able to do both of these, which for not, I mean, most of us have difficulties with both ends. We have a preference for one style, so that's why it can really work better to have the combined expertise and to have people who do both, which is also making our board life, I think, a bit more complicated, because I truly believe in diversity, but it's also sometimes more difficult to understand each other. I mean, think about the first slide with Lino Tedeschi, my executive style leader on one hand, and then someone like Bara Akkersdijk, the designer entrepreneurial type on the other hand. They speak a different language. So to be able to find each other, it also requires really to have these kind of ambidextrous boards. You need to have courageous conversations together as well. You really need chairs that are able to create the kind of boardroom safety, I would say, to have the vulnerable discussions and to really also to say, I just don't understand, or I don't know where this is going, or can you please explain? Or so it really requires a lot of focus also on boardroom dynamics, which is a whole different topic. Looking at the time, I would like to suggest we go to the next slide, which I think is the positive one, which is about learn. If you would have been in the room, I would have asked you, IQ and the IQ, I mean, the let's say, rational intelligence, IQ, is 80% in your DNA. You can improve it a little bit, but most of it you're born with. And I would have liked to ask you, what do you think is creativity and creative thinking? But because actually research shows that only 30% of that is in your DNA. So creativity is mostly something we can really develop. The sad thing is that we grow up with lots of it as kids, and that most of our education systems make sure that we lose some of it instead that we gain it. But all of us can really, it's a muscle, and all of us can develop it. And then, of course, I'm talking about creativity in terms of the creative thinking. I'm not always talking about the talent of creative talents like making music, or, although there's a lot of practice involved there as well. If I go to the next slide, one of the, and it's a test you can do yourself if you like, but one of the ones we like to use for our, let's say, leadership development programs are the meta skills that are introduced by Martin Neumeyer. So he says this broader creativity, he calls it the meta skills in the robotic age, because as I said in the beginning, he says the more computers are going to take over, the more we need to make sure that we learn and we develop the skills that computers have a harder time learning. So he looks at creativity in this broader sense. The learning, the thumb, is the intrinsic motivation and self-reflection that can touch all the fingers, and that is the key for the growth mindset and wanting to learn. The making is experimenting and prototyping, and this is what I said, it's a completely different way of doing strategy development, because you don't always know where, it's the lean startup approach. You don't know where you're going to end up. You just start with something little. You do as soon as possible a minimal viable product, and you just you try and you fail, which is for quite a few of us quite difficult, because we've been trained to excel and to not fail and to prevent failing. And here you're sort of encouraged to fail, but that's a creative skill to really experiment and prototype. The dreaming is the part about the envisioning and ideation. This is we start with the end in mind. So can we come up with, without thinking about practicalities, can we already at least dream up where we would like to end up? The sensing is what we've been talking about, this bigger picture opportunity spotting. Can we look at the outside world, see the early warnings, see the early signals, look around us and see what can we learn from that? And then feeling is empathy and intuition. If you go to his site, you can do a self test, if you like, and see how you're doing on all of this. But I want to stress again, all of these skills can be developed, and the developing is in doing it. So if you know all the famous things, like you wake up and you start to write, for example, that will help you with your creative skills. Or it's also about networking with people outside of your current networks. If you don't only talk to other board members, but you also talk to people from different walks of life, or that develops your empathy, but it also develops your ideation skill. Often ideation is really also about connecting the dots. So it's if looking at different industries from different ideas, and then translating them to what's happening in your own. So the more you, it is really a muscle. The more you train it, the more creative you can get. So it's really for everyone in the room, including me, that's what we can do. If you go to the next slide, because in the end, what we want to do, of course, is be future ready. And Malcolm X already said, tomorrow belongs to those to prepare for it today. So going back to the framework, what I would like you to encourage you to do is in your boards, and if I have the next slide, really start thinking today about what could your business look like. You don't know when you need it, but be prepared. And also think about your future board and what is your ideal exploit explore team balance in your board. And of course, does your purpose give direction for the future? And in the learning, which skills do you feel you need to develop? Maybe using the meta skills framework or whatever framework. But I think there's always room for all of us and for all of our boards, but also for all of us personally to keep on learning and growing. And I think it's Kennedy who said that leaders are learners, but I think that should distinguish all of us from, really making sure that we keep on learning and keep on improving ourselves. And if you want to know more about the topics I talked about, then the book is on the next slide. But again, I will share all those slides, and I'm very happy to now discuss with you, which for me is the much more interesting part, actually, to have some questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fennemiek. It was a wonderful, wonderful discourse. Quite a new stuff that we can think around and integrate in our boardroom practice. Now we will open for the questions. So can I request having hand raised so that we can invite some of you for the questions? You would like to switch on your cameras and you can hand raise so that, yeah, so we have, or you can use the icon for the hand raise. So we have Grijesh Gokaran. Can we have you, please? Grijesh. Ashish, can you help us? Yes, sir.
Thank you for providing this opportunity. It's a great lucid learning. Thank you so much.
Do you have a question, Mr. Gokaran?
I don't have a question. Thanks so much.
Okay, okay. Next is Mr. Gurmeet Singh. Gurmeet, would you like to come in if you have a question?
Yeah, I would like to ask, when we touched upon transformation, during transformation, can it lead to a new organization?
I think so, yes. Which is not always, actually, to be honest, this is often the biggest struggle in a transformation. And you know that it's also a pitfall, because when we talk about business transformation and digital transformation, we often think about the strategic part, but we don't think about what is required in terms of organizational change. And it's the wicked problem. It's the most stubborn part often of transformation. So what we do know is that it often helps in the beginning to set it apart, to treat it really as a separate unit, because it requires a different type of culture and more startup mentality, as I was saying. So this part is known. And this is also known from lots of research and industry and how you can do this and how you can help it grow. The tricky part is if that becomes a little bit more successful, how do you merge them together again, or how does the one goes to the other? I have a friend who's doing research in this regard in the Rotterdam School of Management, and they start to see that actually that what is needed is they are rare people, but they are the people who are indeed more whole brain, so they have both exploit and explore, and they have their roots in the original industry, so they understand, let's say, the mother company and the original company, but they have enough creativity to be the bridge. They're also called boundary spanners, but because they're quite rare and because we don't always design it that way, that's often where it goes wrong. And the numbers are not so encouraging, because I think 60-70% of business transformation fails, and it's mostly on this part. So I really yes, it's a challenging topic. Yes.
Can I ask a related question?
Of course.
You gave the example of Puma, the business redesign. In case of Puma also, a business redesign, it led to a larger business which might be different from the business which they started off with. So it is kind of exponentially increasing your business into some related areas. What is your
I'm
view
not
on that?
sure. Okay, Puma, what I know Puma as, not because I was involved, so I only know it through reading. So, but what I understand is it's transformed from a sport business to a fashion business, which led to the redesign of the board. I'm not so sure if the organization is also changed. I don't know that. And later on, because they became a fashion company, it used to be a family-owned company, they were sold. So then they became part of a bigger company. I'm not sure how much the organizational structure has changed within the Puma company.
Thank you.
Okay, can we have Mr. BVS Prakash? Can you please come in, sir, with your question? Mr. Prakash? Mr. Nandagopal? Mr. Nandagopal, do you like to come in with the question?
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible. Who is there?
This is Nandagopal here.
Yeah, please go ahead and try to be as brief as possible.
Yes, sure. Fennemiek, my query is around the lack of skill. The lack of skill that the future back thinking is okay. Let's put it the other way around. No, the present forward thinking is so much hardwired in the human brain that the future back thinking doesn't come out so automatically. So board members are so conditioned with the present forward thinking. How does the board overcome this? I think deconditioning them could take time. Do boards bring external facilitators to do that kind of thinking?
To me, the most important thing is that it starts with awareness, because again, I think all of us can do it, can learn it. It helps to have external facilitators. I stole a trick from another board president I spoke with. He said we have a board day always, and before lunch we look back, and after lunch we look forward. So he said to the executives, you decide when lunch is. And I discussed this with one of my boards, and they said, great idea, but we should do it the other way around. We should start with the future in the morning, and then in the afternoon we do the after. And it has helped. What has also helped for me is to go to a different location. So to really separate the two discussions, because the running business is very important. So I don't want to say let's not discuss the running business. But sometimes we even move from one meeting room to another. To just physically go to another discussion has helped me.
I think that helps. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Sundaraswamy, would you like to come in, please, with a brief question? Sundaraswamy ji, you can unmute yourself. Okay, I think he's not around.
Okay.
Yeah, it's working. Please share your question. You are on mute again. Please unmute yourself. Okay, next, can we have Aditi Kakade? Miss Aditi, would you like to come in? Aditi, is my voice reaching you?
Yeah, I think I'm there, Sundar Swami. Can I continue my question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Thanks for the complete presentation. It was a very eye-opener. My question is, when you touched upon the point, like in the every board meeting, there is a risk mitigation matrix, a risk matrix, and for the mitigation. And there is a very limited board is looking for the opportunity matrix, which is a very new creative direction. Can the same team can do the opportunity matrix, or it should be formed within the company, or some external new party also required, so that the creativity, their thinking direction will be totally different for risk and for the opportunity management, opportunity risk.
It does require the right brain skills to do an opportunity matrix, but that doesn't mean that the people who normally do the risk matrix cannot do it. But you have to look at who is doing it. We've talked now a lot about companies who need to develop more in the right-hand side, but what I find in family-owned companies that there's often a lot of entrepreneurial talents. So and those are the people who are very good at doing opportunity spotting. But I think it's always, the trick is to always match, the strategy and the assignment that needs to be done, but also look at the skills and the capabilities of the people, and are the right people doing the right things, which so it depends on your team. And if you don't have it in, you can, for me, it always works very good to first ask the first time to have an external consultant, but the type of consultant who doesn't do it only himself, but who takes your team along. So it's sort of the train the trainer approach, so that the next time the team can do it by themselves and just ask for some help if they need it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Aditi Kakade. Am I audible?
Yes, I hear you. Thank you.
Yeah. So you threw a very significant light on the balance between exploit and explore. I just want to know from your experience, what is the ideal composition? Like how much of energy should be put on explore and how much on the exploit? Will it depend from industry to industry, or it will be sometimes there is an old saying that a bird in hand is always safer than a bird in sky. So what is your thought on it?
This is a tricky question because it so depends on your industry and your company. Like, for example, the Italian board that I'm on, I'm the first person who thinks a little bit different. And and maybe that's okay because the majority of the company should be in the exploit part, but it's a big board, and you also sometimes need, if you want some changes, it helps to have at least two people so that one can be not enough. And the same I would say from a very entrepreneurial company. I mean, I also am on the board of a family-owned business. In all honesty, it's a very entrepreneurial company, almost too entrepreneurial, and they selected a board that's also very entrepreneurial. And I've now actually told them that maybe it would be better to have a different kind of chair in this case, that we need. But if we only would have exploit types in the board, then we lose the contact with the very entrepreneurial company. So there's always a bit like you need both, but you also And you need diversity, but you don't need the type of diversity that you lose contact. So you need to be able to still understand each other as well.
Yeah.
But this is why I shared in the beginning the 10-20-70, which I took as a guiding principle for a long time until I read this article. It's like, oops. And of course, it's really have the discussion within your board, which you think is needed for your industry and for your company, and agree on some common starting point.
Yes, I got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Miss Major Namrata, would you like to come in, please? Major Namrata, is my voice reaching you? In the meantime, Sanjay, would you like to come in? Mr. Sanjay Prasad? Sanjay, can you come in, please? Please unmute yourself. Hello.
Getting muted. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you for showing us the perspective from the varied lens. In fact, 4 of them, and including dissecting the brain into 4 parts. Typically, we look at 2, and therefore slicing and dicing it to get more analysis on the behavioral approach to how the brain should react. I had one observation from my experience is that the basic, especially for an enterprise innovation program, the transactional innovation or the incremental innovation is best left to the functional heads because that happens much lower down at the process level. And then when you look at where you can get an extra mileage, that's where you go to the adjacencies piece, where obviously departments and functions need to work together to see how collectively they can take it to the next level. And third is when you talk about the disruptive innovation or transformation, as you mentioned, that obviously I think needs a lot of patronage from the board and the management committee, because there could be instances of failure, and therefore the fear of failure needs to be overcome. Otherwise, people will not come out of their closet to actually take risk for enterprise level disruptive innovation. So I thought, is that something that you would validate in the approach?
Yes, I completely agree with you. Other way to look at it is the more core it becomes. So, for example, product and service innovation lower in the organization, and then business innovation, which is often more the transformational innovation, more at board level. I would add to that the innovation strategy, so how much of the money to put in these 3 buckets, should also be a board level. And I don't know how it is in your company, but I've realized that not all of us know exactly how much we're investing in innovation and how it's been divided over these 3 buckets.
Thank you.
Thank you. Major Namrata, would you like to come in, please? Try unmuting yourself. Major Namrata, we have given you rights. You can unmute yourself. Okay, in the meantime, let me take Dr. Khatri. Would you like to come in, sir? Please unmute yourself, Khatri, sir.
Good evening. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Yes.
Please come in.
I'm Raj. You have talked about the trust increasing in the family-owned businesses. And I find that this trust is at stake when the succession takes place. So what is your observation in other countries?
That's a very good point, actually. What I see is I think in all countries, it's a very tricky moment for a company. And the better this is prepared, so the more and it's not so much a board responsibility, I think it's more the family governance responsibility, but the board can ask for it as well, is to start earlier already with programs to look at the future of the family members towards the company, to either prepare them to become engaged shareholders, but to also look what are your talents and what role could you play in the company, to start that early and to make sure that they first have experience outside. Last week, there were some very good best practices at the family summit of INSEAD. For example, from the Leclerc family in France, who has all these retailers with Decathlon, etc. They really looked at individual talents and they almost designed new initiatives and new ventures around the talents. And they really had a sort of, but you could see that because of it's a much bigger family-owned company, of course, with many different branches. But because of the success history of helping these new generations build new histories, they also have built a wonderful reputation for being a successful, I would say it's more than a a generational company in a way. So I do think it helps for the trust if there is a more, a lot of it comes down, I realize while talking to you, is how much do you have the open conversations, communications about these issues? How much do you prepare? How much do you address it? How much are you aware? Because in the end, we all have pluses and minuses. So can we just have the open discussion about it?
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Rathin Banerjee, would you like to come in?
Yeah, yeah. Madam, thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. Now, the boards certainly have the responsibility of envisioning, formulating strategies, and giving a direction to the organization for the future. But ultimately, a lot depends on the translation and implementation, where again the chairman of the organization and the CEO and the leadership team plays a very important role. So, can you give some
Yes.
tips in terms of how the board can influence the leadership team and also engineer a culture change? Because mindset change and culture change is something which is very important in terms of bringing about the necessary changes to navigate the company towards the future. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and then I will give different answers because for me, let's say it's the strategy that's more an exploit strategy. But in general, what I try to do when I'm on the board is to encourage my leadership to look at strategy as a change process. So to not do a traditional business plan only, but to make it into a change plan. So, for example, I mean, I mentioned Kotar. There's an article on why change fails, with sort of, I think he has 8 rules of thumbs, and it's really the winning coalition, it's the communication, it's the. So I asked them to think of strategy as a change process and to design it as a change process and to also present their strategy change plan. So how are they going to implement it with this change in mind? Which seems logical, but somehow we talk a lot about strategy, only the content and not so much the change process side. That's one. I think that's still easier for, at least in my experience, for my leadership teams than the other one, which is if we do these new pilots and these new ventures, then how do we execute that and how do we make that grow? That's really where you need a different mentality and mindset. And there I bring in external people to train us in. And so I do board education programs where I help people, for example, choose the lean startup method or whatever method, and to discuss what makes how do you go from a startup to a very successful venture, what's needed, and that you need different KPIs, you need a different way of investing. I just learned again that, seed money of 500,000 to play, and then after 5 months, 1.5 million. But if you, after 2 years, still don't have a success, then it's over. But it's a different, you cannot ask for results or a business plan every month, because then you kill the initiative, So there it's more about learning the rules on how do you execute on a new business venture is something completely different than how do you execute your normal business, your normal strategy plan. So for the one, I say, look at it also as a change program and ask them to come up with how they will do that. And for the other, it's about training in a way and learning how do you deal with new ventures, which is a different way than dealing with existing business. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll take two
Thank you
more
so much.
questions. I mean, because of positive time, I'll take two more questions. Bala, would you like to go in? Bala, can you unmute yourself and share your question? I don't see Bala online. Dr. R. Chandramurthy, would you like to come in, sir, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Madam, good evening. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, very much.
Yes.
Yeah. You are touched upon meta skills. That is the future of today's world. How does this robotic age or artificial intelligence will play a vital role in future boardroom? What are the things we need to, because already we are in conventional methods and in a traditional way we are doing it. What are things we are practicing today is a traditional and a conventional. When go to the next digitalized age, how this AI will play a very vital role in boardrooms. Can you throw some light on this, madam?
It's a very good question. What you're asking, let me make sure I understood, is how AI will change our work as well as board members, right?
Yeah.
There's one company, I don't know if you know, it's a Finnish company called Tieto. They are experimenting with an AI board member. To me, that's very interesting because in theory, you should bring in, by having more AI in the board, we should have a lot of learnings from past examples, and we should avoid making some of those mistakes that have already been made. So I think you can bring in a lot of body of knowledge and expertise, etc. So I'm hoping, but this is my personal, is that actually by having more artificial intelligence board members, because the virtual board members, that the rest of us can focus a little bit more on the explore side, and that they can help with this exploit side. But there's a professor, if you're interested in this field, there's a Professor Stanislav from INSEAD. He's doing research now at the moment, how much board members use AI. And he told me that at the moment it's hardly used at all. They use it to make their English better and to improve that, or to do it as a sort of a research, to look at, but it's not so much used yet. So we were also brainstorming on, but how could it be used and what does it mean? And his which is not a very positive outlook, but his input was, well, maybe boards are not they're not often the trendsetters in the industry, so maybe we're not going to be the first where it changes our work. But there are some frontrunners like this Tiesto that are experimenting. And I do think it's going to be more in making sure that we have expertise, the cases, the quick scenario analysis and those kind of things at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Mr. Chaco, would you like to come in? And this is going to be the last question for the session today. Sorry, Fennemiek, I'm accommodating just one last more. Chaco, would you like to come in? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, ma'am, you had mentioned about the business cycles being transitioned. Like, for example, the earlier business cycle used to be more than 70 years, approximately 70 years or less, and the current business cycle being around 15 years. So, what is the changes that actually, in terms of the business, that needs to take as an initiative in order to cope up with the transitioning changes with respect to the business? So, for example, in case if the company is going to be functional only for a mere 15 years, then it would drastically have a requirement as such. It needs to reinvent itself within that 16 or 15 years period so that it can continue for a longer period of time.
Yes, and this is why the innovation culture is so important. It's the attitude of, which can be very tiresome, I think, for some of us who grew enough. But it's the attitude of it's never done. It's like you're a software company that needs to, there's always the next version. So the first version is launched, and then you're already working on the next version again. So it's a mindset. It's and you can call it agility, but it's really, and I think a lot of traditional family companies who have that entrepreneurial spirit are close to that, but what they miss is because they do, it's learning by doing, and I think when you're entrepreneurs you do that by nature, but what is often missing is the feedback loop. So what you've done, do you also evaluate what you've done and how you can improve it? And do you get the outside in? And do you test with your customers? Do you get the outside in feedback as well? So to combine, I would say, this entrepreneurial spirit with a learning culture and feedback loops, I think that makes for this kind of company culture that can survive over a longer time. That builds the kind of innovation culture.
Thank you, ma'am. That sums up my request. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Fennemiek, for a wonderful session and patiently responding to the questions of our participants. We have received about 390 directors participating in this program. So thank you once again for sparing your valuable time and sharing your insights. They were really helpful. And I'm also thankful to all the participants for joining with us. One small request, those who could not join using their email ID as a login, please drop me a mail so that we can factor your participation in the forthcoming reports. And I have been informed that some of you were not able to do that. So we'll check and rectify the system in times to come. So thank you once again. Have a great evening. Thank you so much, Fennemiek, once again from Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs.
Thank you. I have one request because I saw some comments, but I couldn't read them all. And
Exactly.
I know you can download the chat box. I
Yeah,
don't know if I
we
can do that, but
We
if
can.
you could do that for me, that would be very helpful because it's interesting
Yeah,
to
sure.
read.
So we'll copy the questions that we could not take up because of a paucity of time, and we'll share that over the mail with you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the interesting questions, all of you, and making the time to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.